Imagine a bright, sunny afternoon in a small, quiet town. The birds were singing, the sky was blue, and everything felt peaceful. That's where we find Officer Mike. He was just doing his job, like he did every day. Officer Mike was a policeman, and he was the kind of person everyone in town liked. He was calm, super friendly, and always ready to help someone in trouble. If a kid dropped their ice cream, he'd smile and help them get a new one. If an old lady needed to cross the street, he'd be there holding her hand. That's just who he was, a good guy through and through. But not everyone thought Officer Mike was so great. Nope, not everyone. There was one person who didn't like him at all. Her name was Karen, and oh boy, did she have big plans that day. Karen wasn't like Officer Mike. She wasn't calm or friendly. She was loud, bossy, and thought she was more important than anyone else. And on this sunny afternoon, she was about to make a huge mistake, one she'd never forget. Before we jump into this crazy story, I've got something fun for you. Down in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from today? Are you at home, at school, or maybe outside somewhere? And if you love stories about people who act all high and mighty but then get what's coming to them, hit that subscribe button right now. Oh, and here's a question to get you thinking: have you ever met someone who acted like they were better than everyone else and didn't have to follow the rules? Maybe a kid at school or someone in your neighborhood. Tell me all about it in the comments. I can't wait to read what you say. Okay, let's get back to Officer Mike. There he was, sitting in his police car on the side of the road. His car was shiny, with big red and blue lights on top. He wasn't chasing bad guys or doing anything wild. He was just watching the cars go by, making sure everyone was safe. It was a normal day for him, or so he thought. His window was down, and he was humming a little song to himself, enjoying the warm sun on his face. Everything was fine. Everything was quiet. But then, out of nowhere, Karen showed up. Karen didn't walk up nicely. Oh no. She stomped over to his police car like she was the queen of the whole street. Her arms were crossed, her face was red, and she looked mad, like, really mad. She didn't even say hi or wave. She just marched right up and stood there, staring at Officer Mike's car like it had done something terrible to her. The people walking by stopped and turned their heads. They could tell something big was about to happen. Officer Mike looked up from his seat and saw her. He didn't get mad, though. He just tilted his head a little, curious about why she was so upset. See, Karen didn't know it yet, but this moment, this sunny afternoon, was the start of a day she'd wish she could take back. She thought she was in charge. She thought she could do whatever she wanted. But Officer Mike? He was ready for her, even if he didn't show it. He sat there in his police car, nice and calm, while Karen got ready to make a scene. What was her problem? Why was she so angry? You're going to find out soon, and trust me, it's going to be a wild ride. Let's picture it a little more. The town was small, with little houses all lined up along the street. There were flowers in the yards, and kids were riding their bikes nearby. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing too exciting usually happened. Officer Mike's police car was parked near a big tree, right by the sidewalk. He wasn't blocking anyone. He wasn't in the way. He was just doing his job, keeping the town safe. But Karen didn't care about that. To her, that police car was a problem, a big, giant problem, and she was going to fix it, no matter what. Karen had her phone in her hand, and her eyes were narrowed. She was wearing a bright pink shirt and flip-flops that slapped the ground as she walked. She didn't look happy at all. Officer Mike, though. He was the opposite. He had on his blue police uniform, with a shiny badge pinned to his chest. His hat was sitting on the seat next to him, and he looked relaxed, like nothing could bother him. That's what made him so cool. He didn't let anything shake him up. Not even Karen. The people watching started to whisper. "What's she doing?" one lady said to her friend. "Is she really yelling at a policeman?" a man asked, pulling out his phone to take a video. The kids on their bikes slowed down to stare. Everyone could feel it, something big was coming. Karen didn't notice them, though. She was too busy being mad. She pointed at the police car and started talking, her voice loud and sharp. Officer Mike just listened, still sitting there, still calm. He didn't yell back. He didn't even frown. He just waited. What was Karen so upset about? Why did she think she could boss around a policeman? And what was Officer Mike going to do about it? Those are the questions buzzing in the air, and they're the reason you're going to want to stick around. This wasn't just a normal day anymore. It was the start of something huge, something that would leave everyone in town talking for weeks. Karen thought she was the boss, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Officer Mike wasn't just any policeman. He had a secret, and Karen was about to find out what it was. So, here's where the story really begins. Karen was ready to make trouble, and Officer Mike was ready to handle it. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing, but the quiet little town wasn't so quiet anymore. Something exciting was happening, and it all started with Karen storming up to that police car. What did she say next? What did she do? And how did Officer Mike stay so cool? You'll see soon, but for now, just imagine it, a bossy lady, a calm policeman, and a sunny day that's about to turn upside down. Get ready, because this story is only getting started. Karen was mad, really, really mad. She stood there on the sidewalk, her arms crossed tight over her chest, staring at Officer Mike's police car like it had just called her a mean name. Her face was all scrunched up, and her eyes were shooting sparks. She didn't care that it was a sunny day or that the town was quiet. To her, that car was the worst thing in the world. "This is my parking spot," she yelled, so loud that dogs started barking and birds flew out of the trees. Her voice bounced off the houses, and everyone in the neighborhood could hear her. She wasn't just a little upset, she was furious, like a volcano about to explode. Officer Mike heard all the shouting and opened his car door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, moving slow and easy, like he didn't have a worry in the world. He was tall, with his blue uniform neat and tidy. He even tipped his hat to Karen, just a little, like he was saying hello to a friend. "Ma'am, I'm on duty here," he said. His voice was steady and calm, not loud or angry at all. He sounded like a teacher explaining something simple to a kid. But Karen? She didn't want to hear it. Not one bit. "I don't care who you are," she snapped back, her words sharp like a slap. "You can't park here. This is my spot, and I'll have this junk towed." She pointed at his police car, with its shiny paint and big lights on top, and called it junk. Can you believe that? She didn't even blink. She just kept yelling, her hands waving in the air like she was trying to shoo away a pesky fly. Officer Mike didn't yell back, though. He didn't even frown. He just stood there, watching her, with a tiny smile on his face. It wasn't a big grin, just a little curve of his lips, like he knew a secret that Karen didn't. And trust me, he did know something big. People walking by stopped in their tracks. A lady with a stroller turned around to look. Two kids on scooters slowed down and stared. An old man with a cane leaned forward, whispering to his wife. What's going on? They all wondered. They could see Karen shouting and pointing, and they could see Officer Mike standing there, cool as a cucumber. Some of them started to whisper to each other. She's yelling at a policeman, one lady said, her eyes wide. Doesn't she know that's his car? A boy asked his friend. The crowd was growing, and the air felt buzzy, like something exciting was about to happen. Karen didn't notice the people watching. She was too busy being mad. She stomped her foot on the ground, her flip-flops making a loud slap. I park here every day, she shouted. This is where I put my car, and you're ruining everything. She acted like Officer Mike had taken something super important from her, like her favorite toy or her lunch. But it was just a parking spot, a plain old spot on the side of the road. Officer Mike tilted his head a little, still calm. Ma'am, I'm here to keep the town safe, he said, nice and polite. This isn't anyone's spot, it's for police work. But Karen didn't listen. She shook her head so fast her hair flew around. No, 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 she said. You don't get it? I'm important. I need this spot, and you're in my way. She sounded like a kid throwing a tantrum because someone took their turn on the swing. She didn't care that Officer Mike was a policeman doing his job. To her, he was just a big problem, and she was going to fix it no matter what. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, holding it up like a weapon. I'm calling someone to take this car away, she said, her voice loud and proud. Officer Mike didn't move. He didn't get mad or tell her to stop. He just leaned against his car, crossing his arms, that little smile still on his face. He looked like he was waiting for something, like he knew this was all going to turn out funny. And it was. Karen's attitude was like a shovel, digging her deeper and deeper into a hole she wouldn't be able to climb out of. She didn't see it yet, but everyone else could feel it coming. The people watching started to giggle a little. "She's really doing this," a girl whispered to her mom. "Oh, this is gonna be good," a man said, pulling out his phone to record. Karen punched numbers into her phone, her fingers moving fast. "Yes, hello," she said when someone answered. "There's a car in my spot, and I need it gone right now." She sounded so sure of herself, like she was the boss of the whole world. Officer Mike watched her, his eyes twinkling a little. He didn't say anything he didn't have to. He knew what was coming, even if Karen didn't. The crowd got quieter, waiting to see what would happen next. The air felt thick, like before a big rain, when you know something's about to burst. Karen kept talking on her phone, her voice getting louder. "Hurry up," she said. "This car's a piece of trash, and it's ruining my day." She didn't even look at Officer Mike, she was too busy bossing around the person on the other end. But Officer Mike? He wasn't worried. He adjusted his hat a tiny bit, still smiling, still calm. He knew Karen was making a big mistake, and he was happy to let her keep going. Why? Because he had a trick up his sleeve, something Karen never saw coming. The people watching started to move closer. They could tell this wasn't just a little argument anymore. Karen was turning it into a huge fight, and Officer Mike was letting her. "She's crazy," a boy whispered to his sister. "Yeah, but he's not even mad," she whispered back. That's what made it so exciting. Karen was loud and wild, and Officer Mike was quiet and cool. It was like watching a storm crash into a big, strong tree that wouldn't budge. Karen hung up her phone and smirked at Officer Mike. "You'll see," she said. "This car's going bye-bye, and there's nothing you can do about it." She thought she'd won already. She thought she was smarter than him. But Officer Mike's little smile grew just a tiny bit bigger. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. Karen's big, bossy attitude was about to crash into something she couldn't handle. She was digging her own trap, and she didn't even know it. The crowd held their breath, waiting. What was she going to do next? And why was Officer Mike so calm? Something big was coming, and it was going to be a moment no one would forget. Karen was ready to take charge. She yanked her phone out of her pocket, her fingers moving fast as she dialed a number. She held the phone to her ear and started talking loud, so loud that everyone around could hear her. "Yes, come quick," she barked, her voice sharp like a dog snapping at a stranger. "There's an ugly car blocking my spot, and I need it gone right now." She didn't even look at Officer Mike while she talked. She just kept glaring at his police car, like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. Officer Mike didn't say a word. He didn't argue or shout back. Instead, he leaned against his police car, nice and easy, like he was resting on a sunny day. His arms were crossed, and that little smile was still on his face. It wasn't a big, happy grin, just a tiny one, like he knew something funny was about to happen. He watched Karen yelling into her phone, but he didn't move. He didn't look mad or worried. He just waited, calm as could be. The crowd around them got bigger. More people stopped walking and turned to watch. A lady with a dog stood still, her puppy wagging its tail. Two boys on bikes pedaled over and parked to see what was going on. An old man with a hat pulled out his phone and started recording, his eyes wide with excitement. Everyone was whispering to each other. "She's calling a tow truck," one girl said to her friend. "For a police car?" a man asked, shaking his head. The air felt buzzy, like something wild was building up. A few minutes passed, maybe 5 or 6, and then it happened. A big tow truck rolled up the street. It was loud, with a rumbling engine and a hook hanging off the back. The truck stopped right by Officer Mike's car, and the driver jumped out. He was a tall guy with a red hat and a confused look on his face. He scratched his head as he walked over, staring at the police car with its shiny lights and big badge on the side. Then he looked at Karen. Ma'am," he said, his voice low and unsure, "that's a police car." Karen didn't care. She waved her hand in the air like she was swatting a fly. "Tow it anyway," she demanded, her voice loud and bossy. "I'm in charge here, and I say it goes." She pointed at the police car again, her face red and her eyes narrow. She acted like she owned the whole town, like she could tell everyone what to do, even a policeman. The tow truck driver blinked at her, then looked at Officer Mike. He didn't know what to do. Tow a police car? That didn't sound right. Officer Mike still didn't say anything. He just stood there, leaning on his car, watching it all happen. His little smile didn't go away. He didn't look surprised or upset. He just kept his eyes on Karen and the tow truck driver, waiting. The crowd got quiet, holding their breath. What was going to happen? Why wasn't Officer Mike stopping her? Everyone wanted to know, and they were starting to guess he had a plan. The tow truck driver rubbed his neck, looking back and forth between Karen and Officer Mike. "Ma'am, I don't think I can tow a police car," he said, his voice shaky. "That's not allowed." But Karen stomped her foot, her flip-flops slapping the ground. "Do it," she yelled. "I don't care what it is. It's in my spot, and I want it gone." She sounded like a kid who didn't get her way, yelling louder to make everyone listen. The driver sighed and shrugged, like he didn't know what else to do. He walked back to his truck and grabbed the big hook. The crowd started buzzing again. "She's really doing it," a boy whispered, his eyes big. "He's not even stopping her," a lady said, pointing at Officer Mike. People held up their phones, recording every second. The tow truck driver moved slow, like he wasn't sure about this. He bent down and started hooking the big chain to Officer Mike's car. The metal clinked and clanked as he worked. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, a smug look on her face. She thought she was winning. She thought she'd get her way. But Officer Mike? He didn't budge. He didn't yell or run over to stop the driver. He just watched, that tiny smile still there. It was like he was enjoying a little show. Why wasn't he worried? Why didn't he care that a tow truck was about to drag his police car away? The crowd was starting to wonder. "He's too calm," a girl said to her mom. "Yeah, something's up," her mom whispered back. They were right. Officer Mike wasn't just standing there for no reason. He was waiting for the perfect moment. The tow truck driver finished hooking up the chain. He looked at Officer Mike one more time, like he was hoping the policeman would say something. But Mike didn't. He just nodded a little, like he was saying, "Go ahead." The driver scratched his head again, then climbed into his truck. The engine roared as he started it up. Karen clapped her hands, looking proud. "See," she said to no one. "I told you I'd get it moved." She thought she'd beaten Officer Mike. She thought she was the big winner. The crowd leaned in closer. The kids on bikes stood on their tiptoes. The old man with the phone zoomed in his camera. Everyone could feel it, something big was about to happen. The tow truck's engine growled louder, and the chain pulled tight. The police car rocked a little, like it might start moving. Karen's smile got bigger. She was so sure she'd won. But Officer Mike's smile got bigger too, just a tiny bit. He knew something Karen didn't, and it was almost time for her to find out. What was he waiting for? Why was he so calm when his car was about to be towed? The answer was coming, and it was going to be a surprise, a big one. Karen thought she was in charge, but she was wrong. Officer Mike had been quiet for a reason. He'd been watching her every move, letting her talk and yell and call the tow truck. He wasn't scared or mad because he had a secret that was going to turn this whole day upside down. The crowd could sense it. The air felt electric, like before a thunderstorm. Karen's big plan was about to fall apart, and Officer Mike was ready to show her why. The tow truck driver was busy. He bent down low, hooking the big chain to Officer Mike's police car. The metal clinked and clanked as he worked, and the crowd watched with big eyes. The chain pulled tight, and the car rocked a little, like it might move any second. Karen stood there, arms crossed, looking super proud. She thought she was about to win. She thought she'd get that car out of her spot and show everyone who was boss. But then, something happened, something big. Officer Mike finally opened his mouth. He'd been quiet this whole time, just leaning on his car with that tiny smile. But now, he straightened up and looked right at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but strong, "I'd think twice about that if I were you." His words weren't loud or shouty. They were calm, like a teacher telling you to sit down. but there was something in his voice, something that made everyone stop and listen. Karen didn't care, though. She threw her head back and laughed, actually laughed, right in his face. "You can't stop me," she said, her voice loud and mean. She sounded so sure of herself, like nothing in the world could touch her. The tow truck driver kept working, pulling the chain tighter. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see what would happen. Karen's laugh echoed down the street, and she smirked at Officer Mike, thinking she'd already won. But Officer Mike wasn't done. Oh no, he had something up his sleeve, something huge. He reached into his pocket, slow and easy, like he had all the time in the world. The crowd got quiet. Even the birds stopped chirping. Everyone watched as his hand came out, holding something shiny. It was his badge, a little gold star with words on it. He held it up high, right where everyone could see it, and then he spoke again. "I'm not just any cop," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm the chief of police." Boom. That was it, the big moment. The crowd gasped, all at once, like they'd been hit by a gust of wind. Mouths dropped open, eyes got wide, and a few people even clapped their hands over their faces. "The chief," a boy yelled, jumping up and down. "No way," a lady whispered to her friend. The tow truck driver froze, his tools slipping out of his hands. They hit the ground with a loud clang, and he jumped back like he'd touched something hot. He stared at Officer Mike, then at the police car, then back at Mike again. His face said it all, he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "And Karen?" Oh, Karen's whole world flipped upside down. Her laugh stopped fast, like someone had turned off a radio. Her face went white as a sheet, like all the color drained right out of her. Her eyes got huge, and her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at Officer Mike and that shiny badge. "Chief," she squeaked, her voice tiny and shaky now. It wasn't loud or bossy anymore, it was scared. She blinked fast, like she hoped she'd heard him wrong. But she hadn't. Officer Mike was the chief of police, the big boss of all the cops in town, and she just tried to tow his car. The tow truck driver backed away even more, holding up his hands. "I didn't know," he said, his voice all wobbly. "I'm not towing that." He looked at Karen like she'd tricked him into something bad. The crowd started buzzing again, louder this time. "She messed with the chief," a girl said, giggling. "Oh, she's in trouble now," a man added, shaking his head. People pulled out their phones again, recording even faster. This was the best part, the moment they'd all been waiting for. Karen's hands dropped to her sides. She didn't look proud anymore. She didn't look like the boss of anything. She looked small and lost, like a kid who'd just broken a rule and got caught. Officer Mike put his badge back in his pocket, slow and calm, like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal, a huge deal. He wasn't just some regular cop she could yell at. He was the top guy, the one who made the rules. And Karen? She just tried to break them all. The tow truck driver kicked the chain off the police car and stepped back fast. "I'm out of here," he mumbled, climbing back into his truck. He didn't even look at Karen, he just wanted to get away. The crowd cheered a little, clapping and laughing. "Good job, Chief," a boy shouted, waving his hands. "Yeah, show her," a lady called out. Everyone was on Officer Mike's side now. They could see it, Karen had picked the wrong fight, and she was about to lose big time. Karen's face turned from white to red. She was embarrassed, super embarrassed. She'd been so loud, so sure, and now everyone knew she'd messed up. She looked around at the crowd, at all the phones pointed at her, and she swallowed hard. I didn't mean," she started to say, but her voice was too quiet now. No one cared what she meant. They were too busy watching Officer Mike, the cool, calm chief who just turned the tables on her. Officer Mike adjusted his hat, still smiling that little smile. He didn't need to yell or get mad. He didn't need to chase her or fight. He just showed his badge, said who he was, and let Karen figure out the rest. That's what made him so awesome. He didn't have to try hard to win. He just was the winner, and Karen couldn't do anything about it. She'd thought she was smarter, bigger, better. But she was wrong, totally wrong. The air felt different now. It wasn't just buzzy anymore, it was exciting, like the end of a big game when the score flips at the last second. Karen had been running the show, yelling and bossing everyone around. But Officer Mike? He'd been waiting, quiet and smart, for the perfect time to step in. And when he did, bam, it changed everything. The crowd couldn't stop talking. He's the chief, they kept saying. She didn't know, they laughed. Karen stood there, stuck, realizing she'd messed with the wrong guy. What was going to happen next? Would Karen run away? Would Officer Mike say more? The big reveal was done, but the story wasn't over yet. Officer Mike had shown who he really was, and Karen couldn't take it back. She'd laughed in his face, told him he couldn't stop her, and now she knew the truth. He wasn't just a cop, he was the chief. And she was about to find out what that meant. Karen knew she was in big trouble now. Her face was red, her eyes were wide, and she didn't look so bossy anymore. She tried to fix it fast. "Oh, I didn't mean it's a mistake," she said, her voice all shaky and soft. She stammered over her words, tripping on them like she'd tripped over a rock. She waved her hands a little, like she could wave away everything she'd done. But it was way too late for that. Officer Mike, Chief Mike, had already shown everyone who he was, and there was no going back. Chief Mike didn't let her wiggle out of it. He stood tall, his badge shining on his uniform, and he shook his head just a little. Nope, he thought, though he didn't say it out loud. He wasn't mad or loud, he was still super calm, like always. He pulled out his little radio from his belt, pressed a button, and talked into it. "Hey, I need some help over here," he said, his voice steady. Karen's eyes got even bigger. Help? What did that mean? She was about to find out. In just a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3, a second police car zoomed up the street. Its lights flashed red and blue, and its siren gave a quick beep beep before it stopped right next to Chief Mike's car. Another policeman jumped out, looking serious but ready to help. The crowd watched, their mouths open, excited to see what would happen next. Chief Mike turned to Karen, his face still calm but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "you just tried to illegally tow a police vehicle. That's a big no-no." Karen's jaw dropped. She didn't know what illegally meant exactly, but she could tell it was bad. Really bad. She'd called the tow truck, told them to take Chief Mike's car, and laughed like it was a game. But it wasn't a game, it was against the rules, and Chief Mike was the boss of those rules. He didn't yell at her or point fingers. He just explained it, simple and clear, so everyone could hear. The crowd nodded, agreeing with him. Karen had messed up, and now she had to face it. The other policeman walked over with a little notepad in his hand. He started writing something. "A ticket." "Yep, a ticket." It was a piece of paper that said Karen had broken a rule and had to pay money or go talk to a judge. Chief Mike handed it to her, and the crowd cheered loud. "Yay, Chief Mike," a boy shouted, clapping his hands. "She deserves it," a lady yelled, smiling big. Everyone was happy because Karen had been so mean and bossy, and now she was getting what she deserved. Karen took the ticket with shaky hands. She didn't look at Chief Mike, she couldn't. Her head was down, and her face was burning red. "This isn't fair," she mumbled, but it was so quiet no one heard her. The other policeman gave her a stern warning, too. "Don't try this again," he said, his voice strong. "You can't tow police cars or any cars that aren't yours. Got it?" Karen nodded, just a tiny bit, but she didn't say anything. She knew she'd lost. The tow truck driver was still there, watching it all. He looked at Chief Mike and shook his head, like he couldn't believe what had happened. "Sorry, Chief," he said, his voice low. "I didn't know it was you. She told me to do it." He pointed at Karen, who shrank even more. Chief Mike smiled at him, not a mad smile, but a nice one. "It's okay," he said. "You didn't know." The driver nodded fast, happy he wasn't in trouble. Then he jumped back into his tow truck, started the engine, and drove away quick. He didn't want any more of this mess. Karen didn't stick around either. She turned and slinked away, her flip-flops dragging on the ground. Her head was still down, and she didn't look at anyone, not the crowd, not Chief Mike, not even the kids on their bikes. She just walked off, slow and quiet, like a dog with its tail between its legs. The crowd watched her go, and then they started clapping again, big, loud claps for Chief Mike. "Way to go, Chief," a man shouted. "You're the best," a girl called out. Everyone loved how he'd stayed cool the whole time, never getting mad or loud, just letting Karen dig her own hole. Chief Mike tipped his hat to the crowd, that little smile still on his face. He didn't need to say much, he'd already won. He climbed back into his police car, shut the door, and waved at the people. They waved back, cheering even more. The other policeman got into his car too, and they both drove off, lights flashing just for fun. The crowd kept talking, excited and happy. "Did you see her face?" a boy asked his friend, laughing. "She was so scared," his friend said back. "Chief Mike's awesome," a lady added, nodding. By the end of the day, the whole town was buzzing. Everyone was talking about it on the streets, in their houses, even at the little store down the road. "Did you hear about that lady?" people asked each other. "The entitled one who thought she could tow a police car." They called her that lady or the entitled lady because that's what she was, someone who thought she was better than everyone else. But she wasn't. She'd tried to boss around Chief Mike, and she'd lost big time. Kids told the story to their friends at school. She yelled at him, and he just smiled, one kid said. Then he showed his badge, and she freaked out, another added. Grown UPS told it at work, laughing over their coffee. She got a ticket and everything, they said. Serves her right. The story spread fast, like a wildfire, and everyone loved it. They loved how Chief Mike stayed cool, how he didn't let Karen win, and how justice got served right there on that sunny afternoon. Karen probably went home and hid. Maybe she threw that ticket in a drawer and tried to forget it. But the town wouldn't forget, not for a long time. They'd remember the day the entitled lady thought she could tow a police car and ended up with nothing but a big lesson. And Chief Mike? He'd keep doing his job, keeping the town safe, with that same calm smile. He didn't need to brag or show off. He just did what was right, and that was enough. The crowd went home happy that day. They'd seen something awesome, a bossy lady get humbled and a good guy come out on top. It felt fair, like the world made sense again. Karen had tried to break the rules, but the rules won. And Chief Mike? He made sure of it, one quiet, cool step at a time. And that's the end of Karen's big mistake. What a wild story, right? She thought she was the boss of everything, stomping around and yelling like she owned the whole town. But in the end, she didn't win. Nope, not even close. Sometimes, the people who act the loudest and proudest, the ones who think they're better than everyone else, are the ones who fall the hardest. Karen was like that. She was all noise and big words, but when Chief Mike showed who he really was, she crashed down fast. Chief Mike didn't need to yell or fight. He didn't jump up and down or get mad. He stayed cool and quiet, like a superhero who doesn't need to show off. He just let Karen do her thing, let her yell, let her call the tow truck, let her laugh in his face. And then, when the time was right, he showed his badge and said, "I'm the chief." That's all it took. Karen's own actions taught her a lesson. She dug her own hole, and Chief Mike just watched her fall in. Pretty smart, huh? So here's something to think about: next time you see someone acting like they own the world, just wait. Maybe it's a kid at school who's bossing everyone around. Maybe it's someone in line at the store, yelling about how important they are. Just watch them for a bit. Life has a funny way of showing who's really in charge. People like Karen think they can push everyone and get away with it, but they don't always win. Sometimes, the quiet ones, the ones who don't make a fuss, are the ones with the real power. Chief Mike proved that. Karen's story makes you wonder, doesn't it? She was so sure she was right. She thought she could tow a police car and tell a policeman what to do. But she didn't know the whole story. She didn't know Chief Mike was the big boss. And when she found out, bam, it hit her like a big wave. That's how life works sometimes. You don't always see what's coming. You might think you're on top, but then something happens, and you realize you're not. It's like a surprise twist in a movie, and it keeps things exciting. What do you think about all this? Did Karen deserve what she got? She was mean and loud, and she broke the rules. She tried to tow Chief Mike's car, even when he told her he was working. Some people might say, yeah, she had it coming. Others might feel a little bad for her, because she looked so silly at the end. What about you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. Tell me if you agree that Karen got what she deserved, or if you think something else should have happened. Your ideas are super cool, so share them. And hey, have you ever seen someone like Karen get humbled? Maybe it was a kid who thought they were the best at everything, but then they lost a game. Or maybe it was someone who acted big and tough, but then they tripped and everyone laughed. Stories like that happen all the time, and they're fun to tell. If you've got one, write it in the comments too. I bet you've seen some wild things, and I'd love to know about them. It's like we're sharing our own little stories, right here. This tale about Karen and Chief Mike is a good one to remember. It shows that being loud doesn't make you strong. Being proud doesn't make you right. Sometimes, the best way to win is to stay calm and let things play out. Chief Mike didn't need to scream or chase Karen away. He just waited, and she learned her lesson all by herself. That's pretty awesome, if you ask me. It's like a secret power, being quiet but still being the boss. Life's full of moments like this. You might see them at school, at home, or even on TV. People who act big and loud don't always come out on top. And the ones who stay cool? They're the ones who surprise you. So next time you're in a tough spot, think about Chief Mike. You don't have to yell or fight to show you're strong. You can just be yourself, wait a little, and let the world figure it out. It's a cool way to live, don't you think? Oh, and one more thing, stick around. I've got more stories coming your way, and they're going to be just as fun. We'll see more people like Karen, and more heroes like Chief Mike. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and let's keep the fun going. Tell me in the comments what kind of story you want next. Something funny? Something spooky? You pick, and I'll make it happen. See you in the next one, friends. Karen's day didn't go how she planned, but it sure made a great story. She thought she was the queen of the street, but Chief Mike showed her who's really in charge. And us? We got to watch it all happen, with a big smile on our faces. That's the best part, seeing how life works itself out. So keep your eyes open, because you never know when a story like this might pop up in your own town. And when it does, you'll be ready to cheer for the good guys, just like we did today.